David Remnick is the editor-in-chief of The New Yorker and the former Moscow bureau chief for The Washington Post. Michael McFaul is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, and they both join me. Now, I can't think of two better people to help us understand what just happened on Friday. Let me start with you, David. I mean, I want to start by just getting your reaction to what you saw on Friday. You've covered how many meetings in the United States, in Moscow, and other places around the world? What were you thinking when you were watching that?
I've never seen anything like this. It's absolutely unprecedented, and carried out, if this goes in the direction that it seems to be going, this meeting will be remembered as a moral and a strategic disaster initiated by the President of the United States and his Vice President. And it had all the uplift and spectacle of a mugging. This didn't happen by accident. Mm-hmm. Vice presidents and presidents don't pull off something like this spontaneously. They waited to the last question. It was apropos of almost nothing. The vice president got immediately in the face of Zelensky and demanded why didn't he thank him enough? And Zelensky had thanked the United States over and over again, including in this meeting, in private and in public. It was under totally false pretenses. It was a performance of of a vile kind. And what are the consequences? The consequences are the possibility that the United States, after 80 years, is going, in a sense, to switch sides to the autocracy, to the dictator, Vladimir Putin, and leave behind Europe to its own devices, not just Ukraine, but Europe itself. Thankfully, in Europe today, you've seen the leadership in France and in Britain do its best to clean up after the elephant, the United States. It's a shameful spectacle, and I have a hard time believing that it'll end there as just as something of little consequence. It's going to have great ramifications.
And I want to get into the substance of this, which I think is so important to discuss. Ambassador McFaul, though, I think we've heard the speculation David just mentioned that it was a setup. It felt like a bit of a setup. What do you think, and to what end? What do you think they're trying to achieve here?
Well, they were trying to achieve messaging to their base. Vice President Vance is running for president, just as he did at the Munich Security Conference 10 days ago or so. I was there. That speech was a campaign speech for his base and insulted the entire continent of Europe. And this was designed for that. And this incredibly insulting, why don't you thank us? Again, with David, it was so embarrassing to me as an American. I just want to say that publicly. This is not the way our leaders have ever behaved. I've been in meetings with our former boss, Jen, that got heated from time to time with leaders, including with Russian leaders. But it was behind closed doors, and that's the way diplomacy is supposed to take place. And the fact that this took place with the cameras rolling suggests that it was for the cameras. And one last thing on the thank you. Why don't you thank us? I want to remind everybody that this team, Trump and Vance, has done absolutely nothing for President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. The American people, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He said that 1,000 times. But what have they done? They've told him he has to give up his territory. They told him he can't join NATO. They told him Americans will not participate in a peacekeeping force. They have not given new assistance. And by the way, the last package of assistance, their party delayed for 6 months while Ukrainians were being slaughtered on the battlefield, and Senator Vance voted against that package. So why in God's name should they be seeking a thank you from President Zelensky? Now, I want to say it ended badly for everyone. I think the Ukrainians regret this meeting, too. I hope they can get it back on track. But I'm not optimistic, because I don't think fundamentally Trump cares about a peace deal. He cares about his relationship with Putin. Whether there's peace in Ukraine or not is entirely a secondary or tertiary concern of his.
David, let me ask you about the what next of this all, because there are reports over the course of the last 24 hours the Europeans are going to present a plan. Obviously, the United States has long been a huge provider of security, equipment, financial assistance. What are the European? What do they have the capacity to do, and what gaps can they fill? Will there still be big ones here?
Well, the Europeans have great wealth, and it's quite possible that they're going to kick in even more. And it should be said that they have contributed mightily in the effort to hold off the Russians so far. It shouldn't be discounted at all. And the United States also, we haven't mentioned why there was a meeting in the first place in Washington. The Trump administration was basically extorting the Ukrainians, saying, we want half your mineral wealth. Nice country you got there. That deal ultimately did not get signed, not least because Zelensky was kicked out of the White House unceremoniously. It's just one humiliation after another. And it should be noted that Volodymyr Zelensky will be counted in the annals of history as an immense hero. And not just a hero to his own people, the Ukrainians, but a hero to what we call the West, the free world. He is right. He never demanded that the United States send troops. He never demanded the Europeans send troops. He asked for as much assistance as he could get, even as he was watching tens of thousands of his citizens being killed on the battlefield. And the other dynamic here is the opponent, Vladimir Putin, has seen at hundreds of thousands, we don't know the exact casualty rate, but certainly several 100,000 have been killed and wounded combined. We don't know, again, we don't know the exact numbers. But the damage to his people is immense. And here's the punchline. He does not care. He is willing to put as much meat into the meat grinder as it takes to subdue and conquer Ukraine, because he sees that as his historical duty. He wants to reestablish Greater Russia in the 19th century sense, and he's willing to let as much blood flow as possible. That's the dynamic here.
Ambassador McFaul, we kind of saw, I mean, Dmitry Peskov, you're very familiar with him. We're all very familiar with him, the three of us, but he came out and said today that the Trump administration's foreign policy largely coincides with our vision. That, to me, was a pretty chilling statement to hear from him, a longtime spokesperson for Vladimir Putin. How did you read those comments? How should people read them?
I'm so glad you put that up and acknowledge that. Yes, I used to deal with Mr. Peskov. He used to talk about you, Jen, back in the day.
Very familiar. Hello there, Dmitry, if you're watching. Yes.
He chooses his words very, very carefully. They all do. Ushakov, Lavrov, they chose his words carefully. And note what he said. He didn't say, oh, I'm glad that U.S.-Russian relations are on to a new footing based on win-win outcomes, right? The kind of normal diplomatic thing you might hear even from like the Chinese leaders. No, what he said is Trump is adopting our side, our worldview. In other words, he's talking about capitulation. We're coming over to their side. And I think this is really important for the American people to focus on. So let's just even leave aside what's good for Ukraine or not. And let's talk about what's good for America. What happened on Friday was not good for the United States of America. It isolates us. It's not America great, it's America alone. And this play to try to be friends with Vladimir Putin will end in disaster, because Putin has no love for our country. He hates our country. He wants to destroy our country. He wants to destroy the free world that David was talking about. And he sees Trump as a useful instrument for that. He's not going to abandon Xi Jinping, this crazy idea that some are floating. He's going to come to our camp. That is entirely hogwash. And I think the American people need to understand just how dangerous this is for us, not just for Ukraine, but for America's long-term national security interests.
David Remnick and Ambassador Michael McFaul. Little dark conversation, but important for people to hear. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.